Greetings and welcome to episode 46 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm your host, Andrew Wadel, and I'm joined in the studio as usual with my co-host, Brock Vitek.
Hey there, Andrew.
Hi, Brock. And we're also joined in the studio today with our special guest, Adam Leise from the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network.
Hey guys, thanks for allowing me to hop on the show.
We're really glad you're joining us today, Adam, and we're going to give you a chance to introduce yourself. But just want to welcome back first our past listeners. We really appreciate the feedback that we get from you. That we're delivering some good content, and folks are learning stuff when it comes to all matters involving sustainability in agriculture, and it's something that we love to talk about because we firmly believe that agriculture is the greatest example of sustainability and recycling that the world has ever known. And so, when we talk about sustainability at Agri-Services and Engineering, we think about it in what we would consider to be three categories, or three-legged stool, or however you'd like to categorize that. But really, the first is protecting the air and water. That is keeping contaminants out of the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. And what that even specifically means in animal agriculture is, how does animal agriculture coexist with society? The second part of sustainability is resource efficiency, doing more with less. And I have a sense that Adam is going to be digging into this a bit. And resource efficiency is a key part of sustainability. And the last part of sustainability, but certainly not the least part, is strong businesses, business sustainability. We have to have strong agricultural enterprises, whether that's growers, feedlots, dairies, et cetera, as well as allied industries, engineers, agronomists, researchers. It takes all of us to make agriculture what it is. And so welcome back, past visitors, and welcome our new visitors. So with that, Adam, please introduce yourself and tell us about the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network.
Yeah, thanks guys once again. So my name is Adam Leise, and I'm with the University of Nebraska Extension Division. And so what I do primarily is sort of focus on managing the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. And what this is really is a network free and open to all growers, but consisting of farmers doing trials in their own fields using their own equipment, right? And so that's kind of the fundamental aspect of what we do. And as you can imagine, this takes many different shapes and sizes, okay? Whether that's field length strips, replicated blocks inside the field, and can cover a whole slew of different topics, right? So we'll talk a lot about fertilizer management today, but we can even get into seeding population, biological products, cover crop, long-term, short-term, whole bunch of different goals, because really when it comes to farming and agriculture, there's no silver bullet for each producer. I wish there was. That would make our lives a whole heck of a lot easier. But there's no silver bullet, right? And so we need to answer these questions in farmers' own fields to maximize that return on investment. And so we'll be talking a lot about that today, but that's sort of in summary, what we are about at the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network.
And so, Adam, if I don't mean to be jumping ahead. So if someone was to do a research project with you, it's not specifically intended to be for their own purpose. It is for the greater benefit of Nebraska producers, correct? Or right. Even out-of-state producers.
Right. No, that's a great point, too. And I think the benefits are really multifaceted, okay? And so, yes, the benefits for that own grower in their own fields and kind of developing some of these answers that they've been looking for. But then also, we host meetings, and at these meetings, we go over the previous year's research. And these meetings they're going on right now, so there's still time to make one. But these are more of a dialogue, a discussion between growers in say a handful of counties, okay? And so we're discussing the topics and the answers that we've been seeing, say in 2025, 2024, and maybe some trends over the years as well. But like you said, Andrew, yeah, the benefits are, yes, for the grower, but then also for the other local growers as well.
Very good. And Adam, I know you said that the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network exists within Extension at the University of Nebraska. So you are an Extension educator by title or position, but it feels or seems a bit different than what we would traditionally consider Extension. Would you say that's true? And if so, how is it different?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Brock. And I think to the general public or to people involved in the ag industry, they are seeing extension educators up on the podium, say for pesticide training courses or larger conferences. That they may see these educators once or twice a year, right, or maybe even once every 3 years for pesticide training. But there's a lot more behind the scenes of what we're doing and what my job entails. And so we're conducting a lot of these trials in farmers' fields and trying to work and be a source of knowledge and information for local growers, right? And so kind of extending the long arm of the university and university resources to growers, right? I like to envision sort of that long arm, already said it, but maybe a pole, right? Kind of touching both the growers in that area, but then also the university on campus, and sort of a transition of knowledge between the two parties, okay? And so farmers are teaching us tips and tricks and logistics of how things work and what doesn't work, right? But then also on campus and the research being conducted there can now transition through that long arm to these counties. And myself and my daily job duties, it really changes. It's seasonal from different months in the year. And so, in the springtime, we're starting to set up projects and setting up some of these prescription maps that we are implementing in the fields. In the summertime, that's a big data collection portion. And then in the fall, it's also some harvest collection. And then in the wintertime, we are hosting our meetings, kind of putting our reports together, but then also writing grants and trying to get funding for some of these projects to be continued, right? And I think that's a huge part of our job, that we have to fund a lot of these projects to keep them going. And many people don't realize that, but those surveys, those pesky surveys that we are always asking people to fill out, those are very important for us, and hopes that we can use some of those summaries to keep our programs going. So,
Absolutely.
And so we'll dig into the funding piece a bit, but first, so how do you find and recruit research projects?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So kind of the neat thing about our network is we have these connections with local growers, right? And these connections are healthy. They're promoting healthy dialogue between extension educators and farmers and growers and producers, right? And so usually an idea or topics are forming between the conversations that are being had between extension educators and producers, okay? And so some topics and some ideas might just form naturally, or I like to use the term organically, not to be confused with organic production. So I'm going to be a little bit careful with what I'm saying there. But these topics are forming organically through conversations. And sometimes what we've seen is that multiple growers get together for these ideas, right? And so say they want to test a soybean seed treatment, they will pool together, say 5 to 6 growers, kind of call each other up and get together and exchange products and exchange seed varieties as well, to really see, to get more statistical power when we're having more sites under the same projects, okay? And so it's really cool. I think there's certainly hot pockets of culture that we see of on-farm research that is just a great testament to what we do and what our network supports. And I think another part of that question too is, how do farmers become interested or try to, understand a project to be involved in our network. And I think, once again, going back to that relationship with the extension educator, and sometimes it's crazy, it's rocket science, but sometimes, friends talk to friends, right? Farmers talk to other farmers, their neighbors, and what we have seen in the past is that, a farmer will test this product A versus product B, and then tell his buddy about it, and then they will go on and test the same thing. And even kind of a story from this year I heard was that sort of a case scenario that we shared out a protocol for this project that we were going to conduct in central Nebraska. And I was talking to the educator, and they said, yeah, that protocol, the farmer shared that with 6 or 7 other farmers in the area, so we need to go track down some more projects going on in the area. So I think people get excited. Some people just have that research cap that they can switch on. And I think really deep down we all have that. It's just making the time and effort to fulfilling those projects. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that must be one of the most fun parts when you have producers come to you that are fully vested in wanting to. They have a question, and then they're fully vested in wanting to help come up with the solution. I think that's really cool. And so, it's one thing to have the desire to make it happen, but I think as a recovering researcher, once upon a time, your typical farm or feedlot, they don't have a statistics department, right? And so these guys come to you and they say, we've got this product, we've got this plan, we want to do this. How then do you work with them to make the results robust?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And so really this relationship is it's unique to each situation, right? But in terms of the statistical validity in setting up our trials in a valid way, that way we can interpret the results and keep using those results. We do most of the heavy lifting in terms of bringing that knowledge from campus, once again, to the farm. Right, and so we meet regularly with the UNL Statistics Department to be making sure, A, are the projects that we are conducting, are they valid? And then B, the results that we are seeing, are these valid and can these be shared publicly, right? And so, yes, once again, we do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of creating prescription mapping in the fields, sending those files to monitors for, say, fertilizer placements, but then also receiving those yield files. We have a process where if we receive a yield file, we will clean any outliers. Any producer or grower knows that sometimes when you are moving through the field, that combine speeds up, it slows down, you're spinning around branches or old iron, whatever it is. And so we're going through and deleting those data points with formulas and pre-built equations that we are using to ensure high quality data is being used, right? And then laying that right on top of those plots, extracting those yield values, or whatever it is and pertaining to the project. And then running very standard university-wide statistical analysis on that to, once again, make this readable to the grower and to the producer that they can interpret the results. But then also another part of that is have that university stamp of approval on that from a statistical perspective. So it's kind of a two-way analysis.
That's great.
Okay. So, Adam, you have producers interested in projects. You work with them and with your partners on campus to get an experimental design and plan in place. And a little bit ago, you talked just a bit about grants. So now I'd like to ask, how do you pay for this research? Where's the funding come from?
Yeah, great question, Brock. So historically, we have been funded by commodity boards. And so this includes the Nebraska Corn Board, Nebraska Soybean Board, and more recently we have been sponsored and funded by, maybe as a more appropriate word, Nebraska Wheat Board, also the Nebraska Dry Bean Commission, and then some other USDA grants that professors on campus are receiving, and then funding projects through our network. And so these have been great sponsors. I mean, Brock, we have been very fortunate to be sponsored by them over the years. Not just sponsored, but genuinely appreciated too. And I think they have been big fans and big supporters of the work that we are doing, both from a research side, but then also an educational side as well. So I want to give a big shout out to those boards and the work that they do to keep our network moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I imagine it's one thing just to have funding and, they say, okay, just send us your report at the end of the year. And then it's another thing to have those financial partners who are really interested in and care about what you're doing, that they're going to invite, producers to your field days or your winter meetings. They're going to want to be involved in calls to help set up the experimental design, et cetera. I just think funding is one thing, but invested partners, it's different. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that as well, many of these people who are sitting on these boards are farmers themselves, and so they're getting to see a lot of this data, and sometimes, they are the farmers doing some of these projects, and so, there's just a whole circle, sort of an ecosystem of research and education going on, so it's great to see, Brock. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think line items in the budget to support a program is always good and comfortable and all, but when you have these different boards funding things, it means that they're getting value, and so it sounds like you're hitting the mark. So as you mentioned the wheat board and the soybean board, can you give us just an idea of the breadth and depth of the types of projects? You've kind of waded into it a bit, but just can you give folks just an idea of the variety of projects that you're involved in?
Yeah, no, just a great question again. So, a lot of our corn projects per se, maybe I should break this down by crop, because we do work with a lot of different ideas. A lot of our corn projects, can kind of range from, say, corn hybrid or corn seeding evaluation to more robust, using sensor-based technologies in corn nitrogen management, or using satellite imagery to determine how much fertilizer a corn plant needs, right? And so those are kind of our more robust and complex projects that we're doing in farmers' fields, to more, I would say, simple, but maybe a one question, one answer type project. Does this product work? Does this product or system in place work, right? So those are kind of our short term, maybe a 1 year type focus. When we start to look at multi-year projects, we're looking at cover crops or holistic system approaches, or sustainable approaches that we're looking at. Perhaps looking at, say, reducing our nitrogen and implementing a cover crop in hopes to reduce our nitrates in the water, right? And so there's a little bit more data being collected for some of these longer projects, but then these 1 year projects, these make up about, I would say, 90 to 95% of what we are doing, but there is just great value in what we are doing, and sometimes these projects and protocols are similar. We are sharing the same protocol across, say, 8 to 10 sites, right? So then we can kind of put everything together in what's called a meta-analysis by site, and kind of start to average and run an analysis on the data put together. In soybeans, less fertilizer studies, but we look a lot on soybean seed treatments, soybean seeding population rates, starting to look a little bit more on the cover crops being interseeded in soybeans as well. And I think just a lot of producers are interested in, what I'm putting into my soybean seed treatment, what I'm getting out. Scouting is a huge fundamental aspect that we do in soybeans and corn as well. And so there's just a whole another topic on soybeans that we're looking at. And one project in particular that we did this year, white mold is a kind of an increasing issue in soybeans. And so what we did, one of our projects this year, was we looked at 15 versus 30-inch row spacing for control of white mold with some of these different plots being treated with a fungicide and some of them without, right? And so these projects are getting a little bit more complex kind of as we move through, as we get more hands-on power that we can do these more complex projects. And I think that's just great because farmers are looking for this data, looking for ways to save money or increase ROI on some of these products.
Mm-hmm. Adam, I'm curious. So I know you've talked about producers coming to you with research questions. I wonder, do you ever have startup companies who come to you, or maybe they're introduced to you by the ag tech incubator, the Combine, for example, here in Lincoln, where a startup that maybe has some new crop input or production practice or technology they're trying to produce and sell, are they looking for fields and farmers to work with? Does this ever go that other way?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So they contact us quite a bit, and I would say, sometimes it's the right fit, and sometimes it's not the right fit, right? And so I think
Sure.
for the appeal to happen, the product or approach that they are suggesting needs to be in a phase where farmers can easily adopt it, right? Because we're not a testing bed for products or projects,
No.
but more so trying to maximize that return on investment for that specific operation. There's sort of a fine line that we're trying to balance right there. Sometimes we can't keep as good of a quality control over these projects as is versus a small plot, which is just kind of one of the drawbacks of on-farm research. But for a small business trying to get their product out there, there's an aspect of marketing, right, that they're looking to gather from these on-farm research trials. And so there is kind of a balance right there that we're trying to navigate of, yes, we're maybe not a high control environment where we can try to test every aspect of a certain product, but we still are trying to maximize return on investment for growers while finding new products that they can test. So it's kind of a tricky question, and we've been approached a few times, and I think it's a unique response to each company type of deal. So.
Sure. Yeah, I know you mentioned you can't control the variables, in research at scale on farm like you can in small plot research, but I think that's what's neat and important about what the On-Farm Research Network does, in that farmers can't control all the variables either. So you guys are helping to test things in what I would call the real world, right? And I think that's what's really neat about what you're doing. You're accounting for that uncertainty in a way.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. And one thing I will note is, like you brought up that uncertainty, and some of our fields get hailed out in June and July, or we have an unexpected disease pressure. Things happen, right? I would say this year we started with about 130 projects across the state, and we ended with about 115.
Wow.
Which, there's a 15 project attrition, but I would still consider that a huge success, and kudos to our local extension educators. And a few of those are lost due to tech issues and monitor issues. But just a huge kudos to our extension educators for getting out there and getting these projects concluded, right? So there's sort of a natural attrition, Brock, that you brought up, and that's kind of why we need to stay on that balance, that fine line, because if we start being a testing bed for products or new practices being developed, I would say we would need to step up our quality control over some of these, and I would just feel really terrible, if we lost some projects with a startup company trying to come out. So I think there's more opportunities for them and smaller plot research scenarios until their product becomes a little bit more on the end user.
I'll tell you, I'm absolutely blown away that you do 115 projects a year. That just to me is a staggering number. Of course, even in a very agricultural state like Nebraska, that I think 115 research projects, that's a pretty heavy lift. So, of course, this is admittedly just a question with lots and lots of bias, but tell us about a manure project that you've done that and some findings, if you can recall one.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So, in my short 1.5 years here, we did not have a manure project this past year, but we are very interested in looking at some of these manure trials, right? And so, and kind of clarifying that is finding how much credit for nitrogen that we are getting in that first year, but then also in the carryover credit rates as well. And whether that's beef manure, chicken litter, whatever it is that we're looking at, kind of trying to pinpoint some of those carryover rates throughout the growing season in a multi-year approach. And so kind of how we would set this up would be to drop our nitrogen, whether that's urea, UAN, some type of inorganic synthetic fertilizer, drop that in increments of 40 according to the UNL N calculator, and then applying that manure in place of that synthetic inorganic fertilizer to try to make up for that. And in reality, when we start to drop our fertilizer rates in hopes to test either manure or a biological product that is fixing nitrogen, okay, we want to drop it enough to see a response in yield, right? And one thing that really kind of eats at me sometimes is I see some of these trials being done, and the results will say, yes, I dropped my nitrogen by 40 pounds, and I added either this product or this practice, and it's my same yield, or improved my yield by 2 or 3 bushels. But the whole story, kind of taking a step back at that, is sometimes, we are over applying nitrogen, right? Or over applying said macronutrient. Okay, so we need to drop that and find an optimal rate first before we can start to really test the efficacy of manure credits and how well that carries over, or a product. And so I think you teed me up, Andrew, and we're always looking for producers to test the manure credits, whether that's the first year or a multi-year approach against corn needs and synthetic and inorganic nitrogen.
Well, we definitely have producers listening, and so producers who are listening, we know these types of things are big questions for you guys, and in fact, it's something that Brock and I talk about in our day-to-day as far as what's the utilization rates of these nutrients. It is indeed a big deal. And the other part about this on-farm research thing, which it can be a little bit dicey, I suppose, is, and I think I'm going to kind of take what you said and maybe say it a different way, and that is, in some ways, failure is a research finding. In other words, those yields have to be depressed. You need to go over the cliff, so to speak. Maybe slowly go over the cliff. You need to go over the cliff, and then in order to know what is that floor, or what is that lower limit, or what is what is the trigger point of concern. And so it's interesting too, working with producers, that I'm going to have to assume that some of them sacrifice a field or sacrifice a portion of a field, knowing that, well, this might not go so hot, but it's for the benefit of the trial.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And you want me to do what? You want me to reduce my yield?
Yeah, we have a hard time finding producers who are willing to apply 0 pounds of nitrogen in season, for good reason. But that 0 really helps us try to find that economically optimal nitrogen rate, and also manure credits as well would fit nicely in there. So I understand it's very difficult to not apply nitrogen on, say, 2 or 3 acres strip long length, but that is highly beneficial for our research. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and Adam, I'm going to call myself out here. You probably saw me smiling as you were talking about wanting to do manure projects. I know we our team here at SETCHI, we spoke with you and your team last year hoping to maybe collaborate on some manure research, and as things go, life and business gets busy, and it was a little hard to find some producers, but that's a conversation I think we would definitely like to continue here in 2026, and we'll definitely be keeping our ear to the ground and picking up the phone as maybe some listeners express some interest as well. So I know our team here at SETI, Andrew and I, and all of our colleagues, we're committed to help and ask these research questions and help and find the answers too.
Yeah. And Brock, one thing I want to mention again is, when I step out of the agricultural industry and I kind of look at some of these other larger mega companies in America and worldwide, each of them are devoting a certain percent of their income or profits to research and development. And then when I kind of take a step back into the agricultural community and looking at these farms, yes, industry is devoting to research and development, but why aren't farmers and producers looking at that, right? So devoting, 1 or 3 or 5% of your acres to a test bed of products, practices, holistic approaches for the benefit of your operation, right? This is for you, right? And so however high quality you want to make it, great. But it's for the benefit of your operation. And so that's a point that I don't stress enough, but I'm pretty passionate about that. And I think it's got some truth to it.
Yeah.
Not to mention it's a tax write-off.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also a testament to the fact that as an agricultural business, or it's like any business, you need to be committed to continually improving, and continually improving sometimes comes at a cost, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely does. One other thing I'd like to add in here might be a bit tangent. I don't think you mentioned it in your introduction, Adam, but you are a farmer yourself. You grew up on a farm. You still farm with your family today. So I think that's important as well. You're not only working with producers to do research projects, but you're in their shoes too. You are a farmer. And I think that gives you a unique perspective in your role.
Yeah. One thing I want to say is farming makes me a better researcher, and research makes me a better farmer, right? So it goes both ways.
That's a good one-liner there,
so
Andrew.
As I'm sitting in the tractor, planting or harvesting, I'm thinking about ways I can get better. But then it also works both ways. And so as I'm sitting there, I say, well, that won't work. That won't work in the field because of logistic purpose A, whatever it is. But then as I'm sitting in the office, I'm saying, well, why wouldn't this work? Right? And so tell me why. Or in theory, that should work. So let's try to test that.
Yeah.
And so I think just creating a culture really of research and critical thinking is just so important. And pushing each other too, right? And just asking hard questions and asking, why? And if they just say, well, that's what I was told 15 years ago, but then maybe it's time to update some recommendations and move along, right? But no, Brock, it's the two jobs really interact well with each other, and they mesh with each other well. So that's a great point.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage our listeners to Google Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to be blown away by what you find, because you can click on trials and studies by county, by date, by topic, and it is very, very focused. You can drill right down to exactly what's been researched and where it's been researched and what the findings are. Not in some kind of an academic journal either, but in a nice, succinct summary of what the findings were. I think it's incredibly impactful. Again, I'd encourage all of our listeners. Even if you're not a producer, it's worthy of jumping on there, and you're going to learn something.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, Adam, as we start to wrap up the conversation here, it's clear that you're helping producers to be more sustainable in their operations, be better stewards of the environment, do more with less, with resource efficiency, and all that ultimately helping them to be more profitable. But if you had to sum up what sustainability means to you and your team in one sentence, what would that be?
Oh, that's a tough question, Brock. I don't know if I was prepared for that one.
I ask the tough questions.
And you
right.
can even
I like
it can even be more than one sentence if you need to, Adam.
Sure.
Yeah, a couple if you need it.
Sure, I might use a couple. Well, I guess the first thought where my mind goes is, sustainability is a broad term, but I think it's kind of a multifaceted answer, right? And so it kind of breaks in half to two different goals, right? So short-term and long-term goals. So that short-term, is maybe reducing our nitrogen that we're applying through multiple different entry points of wherever your equipment line stands, right? And so trying to reduce or be more highly efficient of our fertilizer placement, of our usage, year in and year out, or just improving our input cost, maybe, and being more economically efficient with our input prices and things of that nature. But then long term, and I think sustainability, the longer term half is more highly focused, right? And so looking at the soil characteristics, reducing soil erosion, increasing organic matter, increasing or balancing our soil pH, right? Trying to improve our soil in a way where we can create a healthier habitat for that next generation. Okay, and I think any farmer and producer listening to this understands that good crops come from good soil. And I'll say that again: good crops come from good soil, right? And we can use water and other nutrients to kind of make up for poor soil, but if we are taking care of that, then it's such an advantage, right, for our operations. And then another thing too, kind of getting into water, right? And so being smarter with our fertilizer applications. Like I said, there's multiple entry points to being more efficient with nitrogen fertilizer management. I say nitrogen a lot because nitrate leaching is kind of the hot topic right now. But those multiple entry points could be either, using a sensor-based technology, a satellite-based imagery to determine a corn crop needs, or just utilizing the UNL and calculator to find an optimal rate for your field, right? So not each farmer is similar, or not each farmer is the same. Some are similar, some are not, but we are trying to adapt and to provide resources for these growers. And then also, one thing that I think that does not get talked about enough is herbicide usage in water, right? And kind of that leaching into our water. And I think there's yet to be some things discovered. I've seen some preliminary results that I probably should not share because I would need to link that back and forth. But yeah, just some concerning things that I've seen preliminary about herbicides in our groundwater, right? And I think our team at UNL has been very smart, very on top of herbicide usage, and it's just going to take more of that momentum, keep building that forward. And then, with both of these short-term and long-term goals, economic sustainability, right? It's all great and it sounds good on paper until it doesn't pencil out, right? In short and long term. So finding ways to make that fit on the balance sheet, I think, is highly imperative to success. And it's going to take companies like SECI, cooperation with commodity boards, NRDs, USDA to find ways to develop, whether that's cost share programs, trying to help farmers support these regenerative and sustainable practices. I think it's just we can't be isolated in our programs. We need to find cooperation from each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was more than a was more than a one sentence answer, but
I apologize.
No.
It was a good answer.
But the good news is, you right there, Adam. Whether you know it or not, you encapsulated everything that I said, in SECI we view as the three pillars or the three-legged stool of sustainability. Keeping the bad stuff out of the good stuff, doing more with less, and financial sustainability of businesses. So
Yeah,
you
summed
nailed
it up well.
You
All
nailed
right.
it.
Very
we
good.
are in alignment.
Absolutely. Yeah, and with that, we just want to say thank you so much, Adam, for being our guest today. I know Andrew and I have sure enjoyed this conversation. Hope you have as well, and I imagine our listeners will too. So thanks again.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. And like I said, SECHI is doing great work. And, you know, the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network is open to working with producers who work with SECHI, or really all across the state, too. So we're just so thankful for the boards that fund us and are just willing and open to working with anybody.
Well, very good. Well, we will make sure to spread the good word about Nebraska On-Farm Research and see if we can send some producers your way. And I look forward to seeing what happens there. And with all of that being said, I want to say thank you to all of our listeners, both new and returning, who have chosen to spend some time with Andrew and Adam and I today. Thanks for joining the herd today, and we look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks.